I am not Dean Denzil Streete, but I'm an associate dean here in our Office of Graduate Education, filling in for Dean Streete. And I'm here with one of our amazing graduate students, Jorge Palacios. He is a first year student in our School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. Specifically, he's within the Department of History, Anthropology, Science, Technology, and Society. So we are going to get the scoop on all things HASTS and hear more about Jorge's a journey to MIT, background and overall experience now that Jorge has had almost a full academic year just to navigate the rigors of graduate education. So I'm gonna pause here. Jorge, if you can introduce yourself for the people, tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, what were you doing as an undergraduate student, what were you studying, and what undergraduate institution are you coming from?
Sure. Hello. Yeah, I'm Jorge. I'm a first year graduate student in HASTS, History, Anthro, and STS. And I'm from San Antonio, Texas. So kind of the South Texas region. And um, yeah, I have a bit of an unusual background and journey to graduate education. My undergraduate institutions where I was in the Brown and RISD dual degree program. So it was this joint program where I did astrophysics and glass, so my majors, which are very very quirky majors. But I ended up stumbling um, kind of into anthropology later on. I've come from doing two other graduate programs where I did anthropology and then I did more art and I came back to doing this PhD program. Um, so it's not I have general advice if it which we'll go over, but yeah, that's my quirky quirky background. Hopefully, I'll probably be resonate maybe with other people who have a bit unlinear trajectories, and for undergraduate students who are like a bit nervous about with uncertainty or like post grad life.
Awesome. I would say unique indeed. What I heard is that you had this double major of like a hard STEM science, so astrophysics, and you paired it with maybe design, art, so glassmaking, and that you then went on to get a master's degree before enrolling here at MIT. Um, we always talk about interdisciplinary research. Um, Tell me about how you married the two disciplines, astrophysics and glass, and how that marriage of interdisciplinary research or how they play against each other ultimately led you to kind of anthropology. And for those that don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about what the study of anthropology entails?
Sure. Yeah, because this isn't something that I necessarily knew would coalesce like when I was an undergrad. So when I was an undergrad, I was just doing my physics degree and I was doing my art degree. And I think initially when I was even back then, I had a big desire to study kind of what is now science technology studies, so the study of kind of the critical and like the social aspects of science and technology. And I was kind of interested in thinking about it with like my physics and astronomy education. And so I didn't realize back then, because it's kind of a niche subfield, but anthropology is actually the kind of has a subfield for that. So anthropology is generally the study of culture and of people broadly, and so I'm speaking specifically of cultural anthropology, and within that, it's actually quite broad, and so the main focus is on ethnography and ethnographic methods, which basically means you go and do field work with a community, or nowadays you could do it multi-sided as well, but it's generally kind of like a deep hanging out with people, trying to kind of add to trying to figure out something kind of unique about the human experience, pretty much. And so within that, so after I graduated, I was an artist, and I'm still an artist, but back then I was just focusing on art, and I kind of stumbled into doing a master's in U Chicago in social science. I graduated during the pandemic, and so there was kind of this like uncertainty kind of in the air, and so that's why I ended up applying to graduate school back then, which now looking back, I would have probably applied in a. I was very new to it, so I ended up in this master's program, which actually helped a lot with figuring out how to make my interests legible and kind of figure out where within anthropology I was thinking about um, these themes. And at the time, I was also looking at what my current dissertation project would become. And so that's kind of how I ended up stumbling into the field. After I did that MA, I did an MFA, kind of kind of an interdisciplinary art program. And then after that, I came here. And so I've been kind of using graduate education partly as a means of of stability, but also I think it's all like helped kind of cultivate the kind of scholar I am.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that you're a lifelong learner and it resonates with me. Like you just really enjoy like acquiring new knowledge and learning and like exploring your interests through education. And it sounds like has helped you to kind of focus on kind of the research question that you're currently studying. Um, just curious about you talking about you stumbling into the master's as a result of like the times of COVID, but you did make a very intentional choice to pursue a PhD graduate program. Um, Tell me more about that decision process. So it went from like, okay, let me fill my time. It's COVID, I'm unsure, and I'm using education to explore my passions, but also maybe using that a little bit of time to try to further define like what I want to do long term and downstream, but how did you choose like, okay, PhD as an intentional choice?
Yeah, I mean, I had, my own misconceptions about what a PhD was even back in undergrad. I never thought, or not that I never thought, but it wasn't until I went into like that MA program that well, for one, I realized I actually really like social science. That was kind of a lingering thing from undergrad. I think like probably a lot of first gen and, low income people, I went into the hard sciences, kind of wanting, I don't know, thinking that that was like the right, not that I regret it, but that it would give like stability, and it was like kind of like, and it's a very demanding load, with my, especially because I was also doing this art degree. And so I never got to like really take that many, but I realized that I did want to pursue this. I was actually like kind of really interested in these questions, um, and at the time, I stumbled into my research dissertation, which is I was kind of looking. I was keeping up with activist organizations and environmental justice groups in South Texas, and a lot of people like one of the big um, things that kind of culminated in the world of like, I don't know, space sciences that I was kind of immersed in as an undergrad. It was really coming into the region I was from, and so there was the Starbase launch site kind of began. It's like really developing and during COVID and kind of starting in 2019. But I think I was really fascinated with how it was manifesting, and the concerns of local people, and so I ended up doing that for my master's thesis. And I realized that it was such a massive project. Like it was way more than a master's thesis could contain. So that's kind of was realizing like, oh, I can probably make this a dissertation project and work on it more um, like long term. Um, and so that's kind of, I also started seeing like, okay, a PhD research isn't just like something you do, but it can be like stepping stones or like kind of space to be able to carve out to like dedicate to like something long term and more methodically. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And you kind of started touching upon like misconceptions about grad school. I'm curious to hear just in general like what those misconceptions were about just generally doctoral programs, grad school. What's one of the things if you could talk with a prospective student about to just kind of dispel some of that myth?
Yeah, no, I mean, I encounter this all the time. I mean, I think most people who are like, first gen college students probably don't realize that like most PhD programs are funded. You get like paid, often through fellowship or through TA ships. And so that's something that I don't think people realize because undergraduate education is so mired with like debt and thinking of it as like an investment and like these kinds of like big scary words and themes, which luckily it wasn't really my experience in undergrad. I had funding, but I've known plenty of people who like have like people in my family who've dealt with that. So it's not something that I knew growing up or and then secondly, there's like kind of a stigma, at least within my family, of like I don't know, remaining a student for so long and like um but I think the reality is that it can be a very pragmatic decision, and it can be like helpful in a lot of ways. If it depends on like what you're trying to set out, but like as goals in life. But yeah, that's what I would say to like I don't know, probably someone in my shoes back then.
Yeah, I love that. That resonates a lot. So just thinking about, I'm also a first gen student. So just even the idea of getting your families to understand what you're looking to do and also dispelling this myth that there's, a financial cost associated necessarily with a doctoral program. In many cases, you can receive funding in some sort. So now you're here, you've made the decision to apply. Um, and so can you talk a little bit about what the PhD or doctoral program application process entails? And because you mentioned your first gen, like how did you navigate the application process? How did you know what to do? Did you rely on any resources? Did you get help? Like, how did you kind of navigate that process of applying?
Yeah, it's a hard, complicated question. Like, well, like so I mentioned I did that master's program at U Chicago, and then I did an MFA program at UC Santa Cruz, and then I'm here. And so I've done this application process quite a few times, which is like why it's not, I think at this point it's not really that foreign to me, but I remember back then it was a very daunting process and like very confusing. And I think that the main things is to not be afraid to like ask for help or guidance, especially from like if you have advisors or even professors that I think that that would help a lot, because every program has its own like different requirements or things that it's looking for, um, and especially if you don't have the materials ready, you have to starting early kind of would helps a lot and like getting the deadlines all together. I think one of the things that's also like, people don't really mention is how there's like there's fee waivers, and that's for various graduate application programs. So it doesn't necessarily have to be super super expensive, especially if you're like first gen or like have low income background. Every that being said, if you do the fee waiver thing, please get your deadlines all. I would make a spreadsheet and like figure out all of the deadlines of like when things are due and the different requirements because every institution has different requirements of like what they need for that. That's just my practical advice. Yeah.
All right. I feel like there was a lot of good nuggets nestled in there. So, one, pointed to the fact that applications cost money, but there are also resources to help you navigate the application fee by way of like fee waivers. So, one, you're encouraging folks to definitely like explore those resources. And I'll like kind of attest to that. Like, if you apply to more than one school, because the application fees can be anywhere from 75 and upwards for application fees. And so if you're applying to 5 schools or more, it can get quite expensive, but there are resources to navigate around that. The other really good nugget that I heard was the importance of organization. So, like having a spreadsheet, and making sure that you're organized and you know the requirements. And then I would say the third main nugget that I heard was the importance of leading on mentors or resources to help make the application process to graduate school plain. And so to help demystify, and so not being able to, so feeling empowered to kind of rely on those resources and identify like who some of those mentors are. And then finally, it sounds like, and maybe also based on your experiences of having navigated several graduate programs, that the application process is completely different for programs and maybe even the institutions by which you're applying. For MIT and anthropology, can you tell us very specifically what are the components of the application, and how, in your opinion, are candidates evaluated? So, what makes you stand out as a strong applicant for such a niche program like anthropology?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel so yeah, every I think it's you said that every anthropology program has different, professors and because it's such a broad field, there's different strengths to different institutions. From what I remember, the application process has usually it requires a personal statement, a writing sample, your resume, some recommendation letters, and I think that the main things that get evaluated are your personal statement and writing sample. Those are probably the most important. The writing sample, especially, or not the well, both. I would say like the personal statement. There's a there's also a specific way that it should be written. Usually, you want it has to be kind of like a proposal of your hypothetical project or at least your interests, and then maybe at the end, kind of your um, the professors that you're thinking about working with. Because it's not necessarily like one advisor. Usually you have multiple in Anthro programs, or at least most. Some still have like one advisor type of model, but um, I feel like also applying broadly would help. I mean, the HASTS program, it's really, I would say that it's a very interdisciplinary program. So it has history and broad social science. So if you can like kind of show why an interdisciplinary program is the best fit for your project or for you, then that helps a lot. But it is difficult because it's, um, these programs are so selective, and I think part of it is not feeling so like getting so caught up in like um, taking things so like personally when you're doing the application process, which is really difficult. I've been there, and I was on like the wait list for like a month during the application process. So and I visited schools and stuff, but um, I would say considering. I would say like being able to applying to more programs then as many as you, not as many as you can, but like multiple, like keeping your options broad helps a lot because also you never usually, you might have an idea of what program you want to be in or like that would fit best for your project, but it's really actually quite difficult to like know that for sure off of like a program's website. You kind of have to like trust that the professors in the program know can tell if they could support you appropriate like in the right way, because that's not always the case. And like the worst case than even getting into than getting rejected from programs is going to a program that is really not a good fit for you or your project. That's happened quite a lot for a lot of people I've known. um it's like a program, a PhD program is like 5 to 7 or 8 years. So it's a big life choice. So it's I would um at the end of the day, a lot of times it is like what you make of like the program once you're in it, not necessarily just like choosing. But anyway, that might be getting off track a little bit.
No, that actually is perfect into what I was thinking because um even thinking about your breadth of experiences, and so now it's time to apply to a PhD program, and you chose MIT, but kind of in conversation, you also mentioned like selectivity, and you also mentioned program fit. So I guess my question is like, why MIT for you?
um Yeah, I mean, out of the choices I had, I was actually kind of a difficult decision in all honesty, because I did visit the other two schools that I had gotten into. But at the end of the day, I felt like the department, I was excited for the kind of interdisciplinary aspect of the department, and like being able to be in conversation with historians and other kinds of scholars, and also the different resources that are exist here. Now that I'm here, I kind of had this feeling that, but before I came, but I found that there's like actually quite a lot of opportunities to like do very in-depth like STS, like science studies research, because there are scientists and engineers here, and there's like these different people that you can like interview or network with to get into certain spaces. That's usually I think the difficult part, or like um of STS research, especially in anthropology, is like being able to know how to like form relationships with interlocutors and like your field site, and so now because I'm here, I'm able to like kind of navigate that more. And I think that the funding package is also quite generous for a humanities and social science program, because it's tied to the union, the grad student union, and so you get kind of compensated the same as like an engineer. Every graduate student gets paid pretty much equally, which is I think I mean not necessarily unique, but it's a plus. And yeah, and I mean I had um I also enjoy Boston. Boston is like it's a nice city, and um I like being in like the New England area. So practically speaking, at least because I'm also an artist, I like being in more of a metropolitan kind of area. So like a lot of programs might have you in a very small town sometimes. So that's something probably one of the bigger aspects that I don't think people sometimes minimize, is like location and where you want to live, at least, or at least be based in. So anthropology, you don't necessarily have to live in one place. Like you have to do field work for like 2 years or so, and you can like live somewhere else while you're doing your writing. But it's still important to consider that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm hearing just things that you should be considering when you're determining the grad program that's right for you. So for you, it sounds like you really value this aspect of interdisciplinary research, and it really tracks based on your unique background that you would find here than a home at MIT, based on the fact that you can do social science related work, but then have the benefit of working with folks in science and traditional STEM fields. Funding is super important. So I know we mentioned that graduate school doctoral programs are lots of opportunities to get it funded. I think what we didn't make clear is that not only is that educational piece funded, but that you also receive a stipend. So I guess essentially work is your school is your employment, and so it allows you to not kind of worry about like finances as you're like obtaining the doctoral study, which you'll have other challenges ahead of you. And I li really love this idea of location, especially because it sounds like you've relocated from Texas to Boston, which is like definitely quite different in terms of like environments, but it looks like you thought about the things that were like important for you to thrive. And it sounds like you're a person that needs a city, you're a person that needs somewhere where there's art and cultural scene as well. And so those were some of the things that you were also evaluating while you were navigating graduate programs to choose. So I think all really, really important like aspects of like making a decision about the place you'll be for 5 to 6 years, which is how long it typically takes to get a PhD here at MIT. So you've navigated here to MIT. You love this aspect of interdisciplinary research. Can you talk to us a little bit more in depth about like what you're currently studying here at MIT and why this research is important to you? I have a little bit of a guess because based on your previous work about having research that connects also to things that you care about. So for instance, your work in environmental justice in South Texas. I have a suspicion that a part of that is alignment with like things that you care about and values and beliefs. But yeah, can you talk to us a little bit more about what exactly you study here at MIT?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'm still figuring out how to say it concisely, but broadly speaking, I'm doing kind of an ethnography of how people think about or how outer space kind of manifests in society. And um, right now, I've been looking mostly at, I guess now broadly at private industry, and especially as it's kind of picked up in the last like 5 years or so. Um, I stumbled into the project of with like these environmental justice activists and in South Texas around Brownsville, um, with how they were kind of bringing up these concerns, these very ethical concerns that were popping up from the Starbase launch site that was coming up. Um, but now that it's like it's been here for like a few years, it's I think still drawn a lot of questions. And specifically, before I was looking at kind of the infrastructures that kind of allow this kind of company town to materialize, and how these back then there was a lot more like rocket explosions, especially over a wildlife refuge and public land. It was kind of on a kilometer or two from the US-Mexico border, so a lot of the debris and sound pollution also affects people in Mexico. There's a lot of layered things within this site, and so I was kind of amazed that it wasn't really being covered very much. Well, it wasn't really talked about, especially in the academy. There's like nobody in academia really aware of this situation. But so, my own kind of background in like in space science and kind of being knowing these like types of people that get animated by outer space, I felt like it was a very kind of cosmic kind of alignment of things that ended up happening to like um have me arrive in or be in like academia at this exact time when this was all happening. So now I think my plan is to do a transnational ethnography between the US and Mexico border, um, kind of about how these types of things are affecting people. But now that I'm at MIT, there are so many um, like also resources with just getting kind of a background with like the more finer details of like what is happening with this like very nascent like industry of outer space like sciences um and so I'll probably do something kind of maybe comparative or like kind of like linking these different things and I'm sorry, I don't remember if there was another part of your 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 question.
Actually, I think you answered the question, but I'm curious based on also what you've mentioned about your work. So you've mentioned a few times that it also entails field work. I'm a biologist, and so more of a, what you might expect. I'm like tethered to I was tethered to a lab bench. And so you might have more understanding of like what that might look like. Um, as a person who's never had to produce a writing sample as like a scientist, biologist, or as someone whose work didn't entail like field work slash, collection of specimens, tell me more about what a typical day might look like. What is field work look like for you? How long does it take you away from the institute? What do your classes look like, especially being in such an interdisciplinary field, and how do you select coursework? Um, yeah. And there is
um
a question from a panelist touching on that, but like, what is field work and how long does it go on for?
Yeah, sure. I mean, especially because I not everyone in my program is an anthropologist or does ethnography. So it's but so I've done a little bit of it, I don't know if you could even call it like fieldwork necessarily, because usually fieldwork, so fieldwork entails a long-term engagement. Usually you like living somewhere, um, in a community pretty much. So back in still today, but like originally ethnography and cultural anthropology, you had to like go and live in like kind of a community. Back in like the 50s, it was like usually a remote location in like the Pacific or like in the Amazon rainforest, which sometimes people still do, and you kind of live there for like a year or two, sometimes more, sometimes 10 years, um, and you write about it. But nowadays you can do ethnography from pretty much anywhere, and that's kind of the an intervention that's happened in since the 90s. But so anthropology nowadays, you're looking at people who maybe look at clinics and talk with patients for like a year, or um, they go look at like how mushrooms um, are manifest, like how mushroom foraging in like the Pacific Northwest, how these mushrooms end up getting to Japan, and like then the how it creates those kind of informal economies. So you have like kind of a range of things, but generally ethnography, you go and so how that looks like in a PhD program is usually like in HASS, usually you go out starting around your fourth year, and you probably stay there through the fourth year, maybe part of the fifth year, depending. You can kind of extend it to maybe, I've known people do like 18 months, living somewhere else. And that's a whole practice of like taking notes and like kind of like eventually taking all of those insights that you get from being around people and writing about it, or like having it engage with broader social theory and like sometimes philosophy, different literature, which is kind of interesting. It's the I think what makes ethnography, anthropology pretty unique from, I mean, other fields you can do field work as well, but anthropology focuses so much on this kind of method. So my classes, for example, I'm taking a writing ethnography class, and so we just read a lot of different ways that people have been exploring both ethnography, but also how it's written and how people write about it. So we just get through like a different book that's been published recently every week, and kind of trying to look at examples that we can pull from for future reference when we're writing or doing field work.
Yeah. So overall, what has it been like being a graduate student at MIT? Um, we've talked a lot about the positives of MIT, but I think some of the realities of graduate school is that there are a lot of peaks and valleys. And sometimes what you have in your mind is your like outcomes, your day-to-day outcomes, your monthly outcomes, your yearly outcomes are not exactly what happens. Um, what has the experience been like overall? And what are some challenges that you've encountered? And like, how have you navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges, I mean, I'm only in my first year, so, take this with a grain of salt. But one of the challenges that always comes with graduate school is like, especially if you're moving from far away, this is like my third time moving somewhere for graduate program, and it's always kind of difficult in the first few, like first probably the first year, to be honest, at least. So that's one challenge. At MIT specifically as an institution, I mean, I think this is maybe goes for Cambridge in general, because there's not humanities in MIT is pretty small, or at least peripheral. So we often like collaborate with like people at Harvard too. It ends up becoming kind of a broader, kind of diffuse kind of campus culture. But I think people can be kind of workaholics, I think, in my opinion. And, it depends on the institute. I think, actually, no, I think probably every institution has a bit of a workaholic culture to a certain extent. So I think being able to like have, carve out time for yourself as a person is helpful. And now that this is like I don't know, I've done school so much, so it's not, I'm very good at this at this point, but I don't get so like emotionally bogged down by the institution in the same way. I think people can be kind of maybe taking things, sometimes people take things so like, especially if you're like an undergrad, or if you're coming out into a grad program immediately after undergrad, you can get like pulled into too many things. Sometimes it's hard to make like boundaries with your institution or your work, but it's important to like, be able to make those things, and be a person as well. It's hard, it's easier said than done, but I think that's probably one of the broader important things.
Oh, I love that. I love this idea of like the workaholic culture. And like, I love the idea that you're like, I've done so much school that I know how to navigate that. And so I'm not going to get it caught up in this like kind of culture of like work hard. And also what I'm hearing is like not having that like balance, like that work-life balance. So I love that you've been able to come in as a first year PhD student because of your previous experiences and navigate in that way, which I think creates so much healthy like behavior and dynamic. It really does, I think, in my opinion, make the graduate experience better and easier, especially if you think about like the toll that it can have on like your mental health and like your well-being. So I like love that you're reinforcing that narrative. So now that you've kind of gotten that down, we're gonna get in your business because who are your people? What do you like to do for work-life balance? Like what brings you joy? And specifically for you, you're navigating and coming from somewhere else. So how do you find community? What does that community look like? And what do you like to do for work-life balance?
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out. Given that I think this is probably the same for a lot of programs, but at least the HASTS program, I think that the first year is generally just a really intense year comparatively to the other years because there's just usually the way anthro programs are structured is you have like 2 years of classwork, and then like I mentioned you do the field work and whatever, but the classwork ends up taking a lot of time generally. But what I like to so I have my experience like trying to make that work life balance right now is kind of difficult, um but generally I mean I have like friends and connections from like when I was an undergrad, generally in this region in like Providence and Boston. So I try to reach out to people and like make time to hang out with people and like trying to get to know my cohort mates better outside of just like a classroom setting. Um, Luckily, because I have this very unique background in glass blowing, there's actually a glass lab here on campus that I've gone to kind of get involved with, and I think it's been really like nice and helpful to like not only have an outlet but also meet people from across MIT in different departments and undergraduates, be able to form community like that. I think that's actually quite difficult in this campus specifically because people are, especially STEM students, I'd say can be very absorbed in their work and in the classroom, and even within their disciplines or fields, people don't often like branch out into meeting other people, and so that's been really nice. I think getting involved in like some type of student organization, or like there's the grad student union as well. It's like um there's a different ways of like getting to know people, I found.
Yeah, I love that you just also touch upon this idea of like, by way of the work, it does leave you a little bit siloed within the institution. But this idea of having to make an intentional effort to connect outside of that silo. And so it sounds like one of those strategies you're suggesting is joining like an interest group or something that you're interested in. So for example, like the glass blowing lab, where you're now meeting folks outside of your discipline, but that has like this shared interest or student group. So we have a ton of different graduate student organizations at MIT, and I always say like that's like kind of the first step in starting to build your community and like finding your people and the importance of having community just at all stages of your life, but folks within the community that resonates with you, but that also understands the current experience you're in. So that just also kind of circles back to this idea of like being a first gen student. And so maybe your family can't be the people to help navigate this particular experience because they don't have the experience. And so finding that like extended family just being super important. So thanks for kind of like touching upon that. So I wanted to leave a few minutes to open the floor up for questions, but a couple of remaining questions that I had for you is if you can just share one piece of advice with an undergraduate student who may be holding a underrepresented or underserved identity that are going to consider applying to like a PhD program at MIT or a school like MIT that might just be very vastly different from what they've like experienced or the communities that they've immersed themselves in. What would be, your two best pieces of advice?
Mm, I mean, yeah, I think for one, I think being able to like find or like not compromising all of the parts that make up you as a person, um, especially in your application. I think that I think, nowadays, especially with like how academia is like politicized and stuff, like I think people can have a hesitation with like mentioning that they're, you know, first gen or like from, and like I don't know, some type of ethnic minority or whatever, or like are but I think that, being putting everything in your application that make you unique and like that speak to your lived experience, I think is like pretty important. And I had this I think I had this hesitation with like not really knowing. On one hand, I mean, I knew that my research was like very personal, um but I also didn't know how to like frame myself as an artist and like having this bizarre trajectory. But it actually ended up being what helped me get into this program specifically. It's I think, you know, it's um has this like is super crazy selective, and I guess they get a lot of applications that look pretty similar. So especially people who have like a very conventionally good application. So being able to like have both your lived experience or like whatever makes you you, I think can I think that helps a lot. Another sorry, I don't I don't know if there was another part of your question.
No, it's just about your two pieces of advice, but I love what you've talked about so far, which to me sounds like it's okay to be yourself and bring your authentic self into the academic space. And so I love that. As you, if you have any other pieces of advice, definitely please share. But as you're maybe thinking about that, I think the final thing to land on is, you know what serves as inspiration for you? Why do you keep going? What are you inspired by?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very I feel like I often like get into thought spirals of like of what am I doing, especially if you have a very like unlinear career path. Like it's a very it'd be kind of a lonely experience, is all I'll say, and very uncertain. Um, but I think being able to like find the value and like the importance in like your work can be pretty important. At least like, I've personally I kind of carved out this like niche in the academy for the like interest in the work that I find important. And I think being able to like it's not necessarily a very, if it was a very mainstream thing to do, it would have like probably more of an institute, like a, a field or something. But there is no field, so you just have to like kind of. So personally, I feel empowered in that and being able to just like, I've been thinking about these things for this long, and now I'm in like a thankfully in a space that I can actually like do that. And I think being able to like have the determination and like like that's something you build up. I think that as first gen students and like as like people of color in like the academy or what have you, it's it you can feel it can feel really like uh like this humongous obstacle or something.
Yeah.
Or that you have to like even conform to certain ways of doing things, but that's not necessarily the case. And like you can there is quite a bit of give and flexibility to things if you um in the end and yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
I love that. And I so loved learning more about your background and your experience here at MIT. We have just under 10 minutes left, so definitely want to open the floor up for questions from folks that are in attendance. We do have a Q&A feature, so feel free to pop any questions that you might have for Jorge into the Q&A. And while we're thinking of some questions maybe that we wanted to ask, also just wanted to let you all know this will be the last MIT Monday for this academic year, but that you can always revisit this recording and others that we've had throughout the year on the MIT Mondays website. And then we have one additional opportunity to join us. It's for Grad Catalyst. It is a student-led webinar that teaches the ABCs of graduate education. So if you want a more in-depth view of like what is graduate education and how do I prepare for graduate school and how do I navigate the admissions process, definitely feel free to join us. Our last Grad Catalyst will be on May 5th, so just next week. And so I don't see any questions in our Q&A, but also just wanted to point out, Jorge, that I think your story and your research is inspirational. We have someone that has joined us that is looking to do some interdisciplinary research, it looks like. So touching on media and digital technologies, on the mind, spirit, and body. And this person also has a background in psychology and a minor in digital tech and culture. And so they are currently working in a group that's studying ethnicity and culture. So just another example of how to like marry all of these interests, to think about how we answer interesting questions and things that impact our world and our society. And so I find that a lot of students, those that will watch this session will find inspiration in your bravery and like marrying things that just inherently seem to be very different and finding that connection between people and science and technology and art. Um, so there is one question that has appeared in the Q&A about connecting with faculty before applying. Or maybe is that a question? What do you recommend about connecting with faculty before applying? How do you make connections within the department?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I didn't know anyone before applying. I just applied, but I've known people who I guess have done that. I feel like it's hard to say whether that it would it's really given the selectivity of things. Like HASS is like I if you're looking at HASS specifically, please broaden the scope of like your applications. And I don't mean to say that as like deter anyone. I think people should apply, but it's I think that what ends up happening in like the admissions committee and stuff is often very contingent and random and like just like it happens to be about what certain faculty are thinking in the moment. So oftentimes the faculty, if you're thinking about reaching out to a faculty, they might not even be in the selection committee. It really depends. I mean, if you can form an organic relationship with someone, that's I think maybe helpful. Um, yeah.
Awesome. That was very helpful. So as we wrap up, thank you so much, Jorge. Oh, we have another question. One more. Do you have any advice for international students wanting to pursue a PhD in the US?
Mm, um, yeah, I feel like it's like I've known people because there's quite a lot of international students in my program, and it can be kind of difficult because, I think one of the most helpful things of like when you're if you get admitted to multiple programs is like being able to like actually visit in person. If you're domestic, I would or in general, I would see if like your institution can like fund 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 you on that as well with but Yeah, and I think, being able to like, weigh your options well. Being able to like, I think reaching out and connecting with like students in the program is probably the most helpful thing you can probably do, especially ones that probably have a similar trajectory as what you're hoping to do. I think there's like, you know, various reasons why I would be, people have hesitations or like, anxieties about studying in the US. But it often is like, it really does depend on the institution and the location and like a lot of things. So I'd reach out to like people in the program.
Yeah, I definitely think also here at MIT, just for some statistics, about 40% of our graduate students are international students. So we have a robust international student population. And one resource that we have here is the International Students Office. And so that office, the mission is really to think about how to provide high quality advising for students that are coming out from to join a graduate program outside of the US. And so they can advise anything on um, things around how to successfully immigrate to the United States as relates to like, visas and how to stay within compliance. They can help you build community with other international student populations. They serve as advocacy for international students and international, in the international student population, and really are serve as the main resource to help you transition to life within the United States. My advice would definitely to be in terms of all of the academic preparation advice is to think about making sure that there is a resource and advocacy personnel that can help with acclimation to the United States and can serve as an advocate as you're coming over into the United States or extending your student visa status. And then we've put that resource there in the chat as well. So yes, once again, thank you so much, Jorge, for this very insightful and very thoughtful conversation. And so really, 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 again, excited to hear about how you've, married your academic interests. It's so, interesting and also refreshing, to hear that, especially for a STEM leading, institution, how your work really just enriches the already great work that's already happening here. So we thank you for your time, and we'll bid everyone a farewell. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.